You're listening to The Mountain Spirit, a podcast of Christian Appalachian Project. I'm a firm believer that we're all connected by our shared humanity, and that finding that intersection sometimes just means having a conversation. It's May, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I am so excited that today we get to hear from Dale Hamilton, who has served with Christian Appalachian Project's Family Life Counseling Services for 16 years. Dale provides compassionate care to children, adults, and families throughout Eastern Kentucky. The need for mental health providers in CAP service area is more than 4 times the national average, according to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. In addition to the lack of mental health care providers offering services, the poverty many people in Appalachia face creates a negative impact on their mental health. A study by the National Institutes of Health found that poverty in childhood and among adults can cause poor mental health through social stressors, stigma, and trauma. The study also noted mental health problems can lead to impoverishment through loss of employment or underemployment or fragmentation of social relationships. It can really just be a vicious and complex cycle as many people with many health conditions move in and out of poverty, but CAPS counselors continue to offer compassionate services to make a difference in the lives of Appalachians. So I am so glad to have Dale on the show today. Hi, Dale. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tina. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great joy to be here today.
Well, we're super excited to have you on during Mental Health Awareness Month so that we can talk about mental health and continue to help people feel comfortable with avoiding the stigma of seeking mental health services if that is a need. And so let's start a little bit about you and how you got into the field. So can you share a little bit with us about how you grew up and where you grew up and share what that experience was like for you?
Well, like a lot of folks in Eastern Kentucky, my Appalachian experience was that I wasn't actually born here. I'm a product of what I refer to as the hillbilly exodus. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, many folks left Eastern Kentucky to go to places where there was better employment, more livable wages. So as a result of that, my family being from Floyd County, Kentucky, I was actually born in Albion, Michigan. My dad moved up there after he and mom wed in 72 to a place called Albion, Michigan. He was working at an iron foundry. So I wasn't born here, but I got back here as quick as I could. As you can tell by my accent, I did grow up here. So I was about 2 years old. Mom and dad moved back to Eastern Kentucky with me and my baby sister at the time. So that's a phenomenon that's occurred here in Eastern Kentucky is folks leaving Eastern Kentucky, but there's always a draw back to the land, to the community. And many of the things that are connected with that, you mentioned the poverties. Poverty is a trauma, and then that relays into generational traumas as different family members experience that.
So can you expound on that a little bit? When you say poverty is a trauma, can you unpack that a little bit for our listeners?
Certainly. And what I would encourage folks to think about is when you hear us say poverty in this podcast, it's not just a poverty of money. It's a poverty and access to resources. So just the geography alone here in Eastern Kentucky, and especially in years past, it created difficulties for resources to access resources, foods or building materials, education. So that poverty creates then how we attach to others and attach to money itself. That's a recent concept that I've been introduced to is the attachment style to money. So oftentimes, if we've experienced trauma, that will impact how we relate to other people. We may have an avoidant attachment, an anxious attachment. We can develop that same thing with resources. Oftentimes you could see folks be avoidant of gaining resources out of fear of not knowing how to relate to it or how to use those resources, not having that modeled.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I haven't thought of when we talk about, obviously we use that language a lot because of the populations we serve, but that's a different perspective to look through a different lens to look at people's lives and how they live day to day. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more in the podcast about access to a variety of things, whether it's
Hmm.
transportation or broadband internet. But
Hmm.
what makes you proud to
Hmm.
be from Appalachia, to have those roots of your parents and your family, and to have been raised here, even though you sound like you started out as a Michigander, but now you came back to those Eastern Kentucky roots.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you answered that question for me. You said family. If there's three words when I think of Appalachia, that I think summarize Appalachia, it's faith, it's family, and it's community. And I often hear stories being told about when Eastern Kentucky folks did go to other regions, other areas. They always found themselves congregating together. They found each other, and then they began creating community there. So that's what I'm most proud of: family, community. This region is beautiful. The natural resources, the natural beauty that's here is just um, unparalleled. And it's home. That's the connection. My people are here. My family's here. My community's here, and it's just a beautiful place to be.
So tell me a little bit about so you grew up there, you had a rich cultural heritage and family connections and community support. So when you were coming in out of high school and you're thinking about what are your plans and where you're going to go and what is life going, what did that look like for you? And then how did you end up in the mental health field?
Oh, well, that was a long and windy road. Right out of high school, it wasn't my plan to be a therapist. It wasn't my idea to be a counselor. I intended to do some training at a local hospital for respiratory therapy, with the plans of getting accepted into nursing school. So during high school, I worked at McDonald's. That was part of helping support my family and providing. Graduated May of '91. I was married in March of '92. I was working at the local hospital, and that was one of the, outside of coal, one of the biggest employers in the region. So there was opportunities for jobs there. So my idea was to go into the medical field. I wanted to be a helper. I had seen how nurses had helped take care of my grandparents in their terminal illnesses, and that impacted me. So I wanted to serve. I wanted to help. So I got a job at the hospital, and it was the inpatient psychiatric treatment. So there, those psychiatric nurses showed me another layer of helping with mental health. And those nurses that I worked with at that very young age really did a lot to shape my idea of what kind of helper that I was. I saw that it wasn't just needles and medicines and that, but it was talking, it was connecting. Like you were saying, if we just have those conversations, I began to see how healing takes place in that. Then after that, I did what my parents did, and that was move a little further north for better employment opportunities. Thankfully, my travels further north were still contained within the Commonwealth. I only moved up to Lexington for a while to work and to try to go to school there. But as things shifted in my life, I decided to join the Army. And as I went into the Army, of course, it was for the educational benefits to help with college. But I went into a field that I thought would be very marketable after I got out of the military. It was sort of that plan. I would go in and serve, come back home, go back to school, but have training from the Army that would be translatable to a civilian job. So I became an electronics technician. I worked on some very high tech equipment at the time, and even had a very high security clearance, which are highly marketable elsewhere. But when I came back to Eastern Kentucky, high tech electronics jobs were not readily available. That's where I found myself. I had the skills, I had the training, I'd done, had some great experience there, but it didn't translate in Eastern Kentucky. I had some other friends who got out and were pursuing some very nice, very well paying jobs elsewhere. But my wife and I decided that Eastern Kentucky was where we were coming back to, and it's because of family, that connection. We had the grandkids now, so we wanted them close to the grandparents, and we wanted that same experience, that cultural experience for them as well. So I come back, the jobs aren't there. I'm working at a few different places. The job in particular, I was working for a call center, and that job closed. And I was, my youngest son was 2 months away from being born. And now my grandparents' faith and my parents' faith had now become my faith at this point. And I was praying, and I said, God, what do you want me to do? I need to be able to do something to support my family. And there's not a lot here. Everything I'm pursuing is just coming to a dead end. So I had that conversation with my wife. I said, I need to go back to college. And I'm so grateful for her. I call her my eternal encourager. I come to her and I said, I need to go back to school. And she said, well, what do you want to do? I'd pursued nursing, I'd pursued other things, and it didn't quite work out. And I said, I want to be a counselor. And I hope I can convey this the right way, the way she said it. I'm afraid it might sound smart alecky when I say it, but she said, well, do it. And when she did that, I mentioned how hope was important to me as a child. The hope that she had now became my hope. And I took that on and just had a conversation with a fellow Floyd Countyan. She was the enrollment coordinator for Lindsey Wilson College. Walked up to her and I said, I want to be a counselor. She began making lists. This is like, there's a lot of things we got to do to get you there. So let's get started. And she actually became the one who later on in my grad program recommended Christian Appalachian Project.
Wow.
So my prayers led to a conversation, which led to another conversation, which led to, hey, I think you should apply at Christian Appalachian Project.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
3,204,335 people in Kentucky live in a community that does not have enough mental health professionals. Counselors from CAP's Family Life Counseling Services are here to stand in these gaps for Appalachian communities. You are not alone, and help is available. To learn more about CAP's Family Life Counseling Services, visit our website at christianapp.org/mental health. That's christianapp.org/mental health. If you or someone you love needs immediate help, please dial 988.
So there is a shortage of mental health providers in rural areas, which means that many residents typically they either have to travel long distances to receive services, or maybe services are maybe out of reach. And coupled that, it's also limited transportation options, so you can't just hop on the metro or the MARTA to get there. Have you seen this lack of transportation or distance impact the counties where a CAP serves?
Absolutely. That's been one of the biggest barriers for a long time. If you look on the map, one community in eastern Kentucky to the next, it could be a very short distance as the crow flies. But with the winding roads and the haulers and the way the terrain actually is, it could be a pretty good distance. And we're talking about that poverty of resources, being able to repair a vehicle or maintain a vehicle or even to buy a vehicle. Folks often rely on neighbors or family members for rides. So there's the complication of that. If I have a client come from Pike County all the way to Johnson County, I usually try to encourage those folks to use telehealth, which has become available. That wasn't our practice until the pandemic, but now we use it daily. But yeah, that is one of the transportation. And you mentioned the lack of mental health providers. That comes from a poverty of access to education. I was very fortunate that the program that I went to had created a satellite program intentionally designing to reach out to communities who wouldn't have direct access.
Yeah. So speak a little bit too when we talk about having to maybe depend on your neighbors or family. For most of us, having to come to the place where you say, I need mental health help you're probably also not wanting your neighbors, your cousins, your family to know. And so if that's your ride to the doctor's office, speak a little bit about those dynamics as well.
I have seen over the years that sometimes folks try to limit that to friends or neighbors that they can trust is not going to tell the rest of the community to share those things. But the opposite of that, what I'm seeing with younger people now, especially teens and those preteens, they're really pushing their parents to get access for them. That stigma for younger people is not as much there as it would be for Gen X or Boomers or Millennials. Gen Z is really emerging as a generation that's not held bound by those stigmas. So I'm seeing them push their parents to say, "I need help. I need you to do that." And thankfully, what I'm seeing is the parents that are responding in a positive way.
That's good news, and I'm glad to hear that for this generation. It feels like it's been just one challenge after another, but I'm glad to see, and I think that they are also helping the other generations to embrace it and to kick the stigma of saying I need help. I need to talk to someone. So one of the other barriers that we talk about when we talk about mental health challenge or even just healthcare in general is the lack of adequate insurance. And maybe people don't realize that sometimes mental health services are not even covered under our insurance. And so, can you talk a little bit about how that issue is dealt with at CAP and what that looks like for folks trying to navigate the payment and all of those things, mental health services in the community?
Prior to coming to Christian Appalachian Project, I worked for a mental health agency. That it was very important in that environment that the person have a billable diagnosis. So I found myself in situations sometimes as an emerging professional counselor where I felt that diagnoses were being pushed one way or another in order for it to meet, in order to be paid for. If not, those persons would have to pay out of pocket, and that was often a deal breaker. That if folks had to pay out of pocket, they just weren't going to access those services. However, when I experienced the great blessing of coming to Family Life Counseling Services, we're donor supported. And at that point, when I first came to CAP, we weren't billing insurance. We did have a sliding scale fee. And one of the reasons for that was that research shows that if there is a cost to it, it's more effective. You got more skin in the game. But the sliding scale fee that we had was very minimal, and we often waived it. So if we set the scale at $5 and somebody said, "Oh, I can't pay that," it's a great blessing to be able to say, "Okay, well, we'll waive that for now. If that ever changes, just let me know and we can revisit that." One of the big diagnoses that I work with that is not a billable diagnosis is called adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorder with depressed mood, with disturbance of behavior. And oftentimes you'll see that we've worked very closely with Child Protective Services over the years. A child being removed from a home, placed in foster care, that's an adjustment disorder. That's an issue with that. So at the previous agency, I probably wouldn't see that client because that wasn't a billable diagnosis. Here at CAP, I have that freedom to meet that child where they're at and do the work that they need. And that also gives me time to maybe assess if it was actually acute stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. And without the client feeling the pressure of having to pay out of pocket or CAP or the program not being able to have a billable diagnosis, that wasn't an issue, and that's a great blessing.
I know you work a lot with kids. You mentioned kids several times in this interview. What are the kind of issues that you see in helping children process, all of the different traumas that are there? And is there anything you do to prepare yourself for that work of hearing those kind of traumatic stories? I know that you're a dad, and so first, how do you help the kids? What are the things that they're facing? What kind of traumatic situations are you helping them deal with? And then how do you like strengthen yourself to help them process those traumas?
Right. I would say one of the biggest populations that we've worked with. Again, over the years, we've had a very close relationship with Child Protective Services and family courts in our area. That was something that just kind of organically happened over the years as we've made these connections with folks, because we do family counseling. Oftentimes, the social workers we refer for family reunification. So we were exposed to parents who were substance abusing, and the children were lost for neglect and abuse. So a lot of the work I do with children is trauma related, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, even emotional abuse. So some of the techniques I use with that, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is a widely researched model of cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's ordered in such a way that makes it more palatable to a child to be able to receive that therapy. Oftentimes in talk therapy, it's, okay, we're sitting down now, tell me the bad, awful story. Well, for a child with limited resources and limited cognitive and emotional abilities, that's a secondary trauma if they don't have the skills to be able to process it and deal with it. So what TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, does is it outlines the treatment in such a way that skill builds prior to the child telling the story. That's not the primary goal of TFCBT, the trauma narrative, as they call it in this model. The first thing that happens is psychoeducation, talking with the parents or grandparents, whoever, foster parents, and teaching them what trauma is. And then there's also trauma assessments that we administer at that stage. Then we teach the child relaxation techniques, how to be in a relaxed body, so that when they're triggered later on, when they're telling the stories, they'll know how to relax. Then there's affect skill building, how to recognize emotions, how to regulate emotions. I'm feeling sad right now, and it's okay to feel sad right now. I need to process it. Or I'm feeling sad and it's too much. I need to shift to another feeling. Then there's cognitive. The cognitive stage teaches children how to reframe their thoughts. And you alluded to this earlier. I love that you used the word shame. This part shifts from a shame perspective to a grief perspective, or maybe even a guilt perspective. So shame says, I am bad. Grief and guilt says, a bad thing happened.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful.
Then after all those steps, then they tell their trauma narrative. I help them make a book, make a painting, a comic book, something that tells their story that then they can share with others. Then we look at things that may trigger them in real life and help them practice how to respond to it. Then we assess for the danger. Are they going to be traumatized again? Another form of therapy I use is highly researched and shown to be effective. It's EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And in her book, Francine Shapiro said she immediately regretted calling it eye movement because it doesn't have to be eye movements. It can be any form of bilateral stimulation. So I'm standing here with my arms crossed, tapping each shoulder. That's bilateral stimulation, and that activates my brain in such a way that I can think of a traumatic memory, and that dual attention on the tapping and thinking about the memory helps me to stay in a relaxed body state. That's one school of thought. Another school of thought is that it activates the brain similarly to EMDR, to REM sleep, REM sleep. And in that stage of sleep, our short-term memories are being converted to long-term memories. And when we have that bilateral stimulation of the brain, we're able to access those long-term memories in a process known as adaptive information processing. I just notice what's in this box of my memories. I notice how my body reacts so I pick out the worst part of it, and I think about it, and I have the bilateral stimulation. Then I notice the next thing that comes up. And it's like, think of it as the brain as picking out items in the box and putting it back in an orderly fashion to where it stays on the shelf and stays where it needs to be. So that's a great form of therapy. And secondary trauma, you asked if how do I prepare for it? I have to take lots of walks. I'm a somatic experiencer. If I hear somebody's traumatic story and it starts becoming my trauma, I've got to move my body and to get back to a state of calmness and a state of not being traumatized by it.
So talk a little bit about secondary trauma, because I feel like we don't, it's almost like secondhand smoke. Like you're thinking, I'm not a smoker. I'm not the smoker. Why, would I be interested in these secession things, but it's having an impact
Yes.
on you. So define secondary trauma and how do you recognize it in yourself? So you may be looking at the primary person saying, oh, they need to go talk to someone. You may yourself, whether you're the parent, whether you're the friend, maybe you're the spouse.
Understand that. Yeah. Secondary trauma is just that. We have these neurons, mirror neurons. It's oftentimes how we learn behaviors. Babies, I love playing with babies and sticking my tongue out at them. They just instinctively stick their tongue out too. So they're mirroring me. So if I'm sitting knee to knee, my knees pointing towards somebody else and their knees are pointing towards me, and they are telling me their traumas. My brain is hearing that story and accepting what is happening. And at a very unconscious level, my brain doesn't know that it's not happening to me. So unconsciously, I'm storing this data and my body is reacting to that. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. When we are traumatized, it's stored with body memories. So first of all, as a clinician, I have to be aware of what my stuff is, where my trauma triggers are, things that I've experienced in my life that may be triggered by a client telling their story. I have to be aware of that, and I have to prepare for that, and I have to do my own healing. So in the past, I've been in therapy. I can only heal to the extent that I have been healed. So I have sought my healing to be more effective in my life and for my clients. And like I said before, I have to do things that regulate me. And for me, that's physical activities, because all day long, I'm in the thoughts and I'm in the feelings. So I take that and shift it into the body and be active and move. And that helps me to stay safeguarded in those ways.
And if you're not a therapist yourself, how do you recognize secondary trauma in yourself or see that maybe I need to be thinking about how that might impact me versus just thinking about the primary person who might need help?
One of the first ways that you can recognize it is finding yourself to be irritable and not knowing why. So that for me is a flag to, do that. The Apostle Paul teaches us to do that valued introspection, that sober self-assessment, to think about ourselves. So if I find myself being irritable and I can't really place my finger on the why, I do a scan back to see what I've encountered that day that may have been triggering for me. Another thing is intrusive thoughts. If you're thinking about it, dwelling on it, as my grandmother would say, if you find yourself spending too much time thinking about it and it affects your concentration, it affects your ability to relate with others, your ability to a loss of energy, and perhaps even feelings of guilt. And if you think about it, it's very similar to depression symptoms that we can start to encounter with secondary trauma.
You're a bunch of education for us today, Dale, and hopefully our listeners are picking up on things that can help them or those loved ones around them. I know that you are a dedicated mental health advocate in general, not just treating your clients, but working to help those in the profession. As a past president of the Kentucky Counseling Association, I know you've worked to invest in other mental health professionals. Can you describe your work with the KCA and what the Kentucky Counseling Association is and why is it important in Kentucky?
Right. Thank you. The KCA is a division of the American Counseling Association. ACA was key in developing what's known as the Interstate Compact, the agreement between states about counseling licensure, where there can be reciprocity and dual license for states involved in this compact. KCA, Kentucky was one of the first 10 states involved in that, and that gave us access to the board that helped create the bylaws on that. So I'm very excited that Kentucky was one of the early advocates. So we were on very early with that, and KCA was an advocate for that and promoted it. We put on an annual conference every year with great quality trainings to educate and empower mental health counselors from across the Commonwealth. But that's a great place for mental health professionals and school counselors also to network together, to become acquainted with each other. Like you said, to have those conversations, we grow stronger. I mean, that's our motto in Kentucky, right? United we stand and divided we fall. So a place to come together, connect, to grow. That was my theme the year I was president, was EDGE: empowerment, development, growth, and encouragement. That's what I see our conference delivering to the professional counselors in Kentucky. And then, of course, with ACA, delegates from the Kentucky Counseling Association went up to Washington, D.C. last year to advocate for mental health needs. And that was a back-breaking day of hard work, of commuting across the Senate and Congress office buildings to advocate for mental health needs, not only in Kentucky, but other teams from across the nation.
Dale, believe it or not, our time is up. I feel like I could just talk to you all day. Just reminding people that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and an opportunity, if you haven't thought about it or looked at risk factors or those kind of things, we encourage people during this month to do that. And I know that the many things you share today hopefully gives people many things to think about, not just in the families that we serve through Christian Appalachian Project, but in their own communities, maybe even in their own household or their circle of influence. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And we never let a guest get out of here without asking our final question. So the mission statement of Christian Appalachian Project is building hope, transforming lives, and sharing Christ's love through service in Appalachia. Hope, transformation, love, and service. Which one resonates with you the most when you think of Appalachia?
I would have to say hope. That's the beginning of my origin story. That's the beginning of my origin story with CAP. And with each session, the expectancy of a positive outcome, even when there's no evidence and there's no substance to say that things will turn out okay, just to trust and believe and to know that all will be well. All may not be well, but all will be well.
Dale, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Tina.
Absolutely. Our guest today has been Dale Hamilton, a mental health professional with Christian Appalachian Project's Family Life Counseling Services. We hope you've enjoyed the show today and that you'll check out next week's episode. Tell your friends to check us out too. You can follow the work of Christian Appalachian Project on all social media channels. You can also find the podcast at wearecap.org/podcast or wherever you get your favorite podcast. If you like the show, please take a moment to leave us a review. We'd surely appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. We will certainly, by the grace of God, see you next week. Thank you for enjoying the show.